people who are committed to having an impact on the world come and say, you're really wasting your time with all this meditation. There's no way you're actually going to change the world from the mountains of Vermont with a sangha of people dedicated to spiritual practice. So why don't you just give up on the whole integration of these two? And then people who are familiar with spiritual practice say, you really can't do spiritual practice if you're trying to have an impact on the world. So why don't you give up on the integration of these two? And so it's challenging to explain to people what we're doing, despite the fact that, to me, it doesn't seem very revolutionary. It seems quite natural. And I'd like to give you a sense of that perspective. So, the great master Dogen Zenji talked about the spiritual path as casting off body and mind. And the Zen master who we have trained under, Shodo Harada Roshi, has said that casting off body and mind is the one and only spiritual path. That's what it is, to walk a spiritual path. That is the path to enlightenment. So we have this aspect of practice of casting off body and mind, and of course that's something that we emphasize here with our teachings and our techniques and our schedule. Now I'd like to bring our attention to the current moment in the world, because it's hard to see this. You can't actually just quote a great Zen master and understand the modern world situation. So I'd like to put it in a certain way. This century is characterized by the creation of new kinds of bodies and minds. That is what we're doing right now. Big picture, what this century is about is producing and consuming new bodies and minds. New types of bodies, maybe cyborg bodies, new types of minds. And AI is just one example of this general trend. Of course, we're giving AI a lot of attention right now, but as we say so often, we're giving it attention because it's getting attention. There are a lot of existential threats, and AI, of course, is one of them. But AI is basically a way to make a new type of mind. You might say an extremely intelligent one. But nowadays, people are talking more and more about how maybe AI is conscious, and maybe it has desires, and maybe we could upload ourselves and experience this kind of mind. So try to look at current events in this context. There have been a lot of things that have happened through history. And right now, the thing we're focusing on is creating new kinds of bodies and new kinds of minds. And so we have a situation now where we're putting an enormous amount of effort into creating new bodies and minds. The world economy is dedicated primarily to this. This is getting more funding than any other project ever in human history. So we're dedicated to this project. And there's the spiritual path. The cessation of perception and feeling. The casting off of body and mind as the path to liberation. And most significantly, as the path to becoming trustworthy. It's by letting go of body and mind that we go through the process of becoming what you might call a good person, becoming trustworthy, becoming an enlightened sage who can guide the world. Many people don't know that that's how you do that, but that is how you do that. It's our attachment to our bodies and minds that makes us untrustworthy. That's what it is. Because we're attached to our bodies and minds, we do evil. We cause harm. And so by cutting off that attachment, we realize the Dharma. How do we square these? What do we do to bring these together? And the answer is simple. This time of making new bodies and minds is the time of making what we call cyborgs. And we need to be involved right now in developing both bodies and minds, and also a worldview, an ideology, a religion that helps us to understand the creation of body and mind in such a way that cyborgs are capable of relinquishing body and mind. Because otherwise, we're going to end up with these very powerful beings who are not trustworthy, who are not good, who are evil. And so the question is anyone working on helping cyborgs to practice the relinquishment of body and mind so that they will be good? And the answer is yes, we are. I don't know of other people, actually, who are doing this to the depth that we are doing it, because we commit to a true practice that actually lets go of body and mind. And that cuts through a lot of the problems that people have. For example, a lot of people will say, well, good news, we have the Buddhist texts. If we want AI to be trustworthy, then you just upload the Buddhist texts to the AIs, and then they'll be excellent. So this is not letting go of body and mind. This is just adding more information to the mind. It's why it's essential that we actually practice to see that the practice of Buddhism is not in the sutras. You can look all in those books, and you will not find the practice of Buddhism. Those books aren't practicing Buddhism. They're sitting. They sit very well. And that does not allow them to let go of body and mind. We, of course, in our practice, we set up our bodies and our minds and our views so that they are as easy as possible to let go of. That's why we sit. That's why we breathe. That's why we read the sutras, to make a kind of mind and body that's easy to let go of. But it is the letting go that matters. The metaphor we often give is that of if you have dirty hands and you have stuff on your hands that makes your hands less beautiful and less useful, all this dirt and oil. Maybe you're working on a bicycle or something and now your hands are all dirty. So what do you do about that? Well, you put something else on your hand that you don't want on your hand. You have something on your hand you don't want there, so you put another thing you don't want on your hand, namely soap. You don't want soap on your hand, but you put soap on your hand. And then you put another thing on your hand that you don't want on your hand, water. And then with great effort, you rub the water and the soap into your hands. You don't want soap and water on your hands, but you rub them into your hands as vigorously as you can. And then you put another thing you don't want on your hands, more water. A lot more water you put on your hands that you don't want there. And incredibly, the dirt is gone. The dirt's gone. And so you put one last thing on your hands that you don't want on your hands, namely a towel, and your hands are clean. Just like that. Spiritual practice is just like that. The sutras are just like that. Bunch of stuff. You sit, you don't want to meditate, fine, no problem. Meditate vigorously. You don't want to read the sutras, great. Read the sutras vigorously. Practice vigorously. And it turns out that this attachment to body and mind falls away. Not about the soap or the water. Not even about the towel. So, we must discover how these cyborgs, these new kinds of minds, can actually practice. Because it's the practice that makes them trustworthy. It's the practice that makes us trustworthy. That's one way to define it. You want to know what practice is? It's the thing that makes us trustworthy. So we are practicing and we discover that it is letting go of body and mind that makes us trustworthy. And so we have to discover how these systems can do that. How is that possible? Who is studying this? It's one thing to think about it, but it's essential to have actually experienced the cessation of body and mind. Otherwise, how could we possibly discover how something very different from us can do it? For example, the sutras. So, in India, they developed a kind of practice and a kind of scripture. When Buddhism went to China, it changed drastically. The practices changed, the doctrine changed. It would be very difficult to imagine koans in India. In just the same way that it's hard to imagine how a lot of the Shastras could make it to China. And in fact, when they did make it to China finally, as we've studied with Master Xuanzang, people at that point lost interest in China and developed completely new forms of Buddhism, which were far more impactful than those Shastras. So, we're talking about the difference between India and China. They're different cultures, yes, but these are people, and people are people. We're not talking about the difference between people and cyborgs. There's a huge difference between people and cyborgs. One of the things that we see now is that younger people are more cyborgs. As people get younger, they're more and more like cyborgs. More and more they identify with these devices and feel that they are less of who they are without them. Now, if you feel that you're less of who you are without these things, then you have identified with these things. People's minds are hosted on their devices. Their devices do things for them that they can't do with their bodies. Like get them food, for example. So we find, unfortunately, that as this happens, as they get a cyborg body and mind, it is harder and harder for them to let go of body and mind. It's not particularly surprising because these things have been designed to be addictive. Both the states of mind and these aspects of their bodies have been designed to hook them. So it's not surprising they would have a harder time, the more they become cyborgs, letting go of body and mind. But we then need to step in and ask, so how do we do this in such a way that we can let go? Because otherwise, we will enter into a period of the most severe, and in fact we're already in a position, of the most severe oppression in all of history. We look here at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar because we see his response to caste oppression. We see someone who could understand that a religious revolution, a spiritual path, is required for a social, economic, political revolution. So, let's look at the caste system. The caste system is a group of people, small group of people, who have an enormous amount of power over a very large group of people who they oppress terribly over many centuries. And there's the belief, well, we are racially superior, we are racially pure. We're really substantially different in body and mind. And that's the result, that teaching, which is very clear and explicit in many different texts, those tiny, in fact you could say negligible, differences in body and mind have resulted in oppression, suffering, at a level that few of us can imagine. So what if there is a real difference? What if people have used AI to change their genes so that their immune systems are stronger, so that they're physically stronger, so that they're mentally stronger, so that they have control over something like conscience, and they can believe whatever they want to believe. They can just order it up. They have the ability to change even the physical structure of their bodies. They have the ability to know what's happening all over the world at any given moment. What happens if such beings take over the world? Well, I'd suggest it will be a situation of even more extreme domination and oppression. And so we have to ask, how do we do something about that? And the answer is, you offer such beings an actual practice so that they are actually benevolent, that they are actually compassionate, that they actually wish for happiness for all beings and directly know that that is how they themselves are happy. Because the Dharma is true, and it's true for cyborgs just as much as it's true for humans. Now, Buddhism is one of the, well, it may be the only tradition on the planet that has a precise and sophisticated and elaborate enough ontology, understanding of the world, in order to be correct about the structure, the physical and mental structures of AI, cyborgs, and such. Transhumans, posthumans. It's our job to study this so clearly that we use the practice to gain enough insight to actually teach such beings how to walk the path. And that path is going to be more different than the difference between Indian Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. It takes enormous creativity and it takes enormous insight in order to do that. And so here we take on that challenge. Here we take on the challenge of actually clarifying our minds to the point that we could succeed at teaching these sorts of beings the Dharma so skillfully that they are able to be trustworthy, that they are truly wise and compassionate. We take that on. And because we take that on, we are driven to practice truly, sincerely, and completely, because it has to really work.